Assalamu alaikum, welcome in debate. I am your host Tariq Khan. Today we will explore and analyze the most important issue as non-traditional and non-violent approaches in addressing violent extremism and terrorism in Africa. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Akinola Olojo. You are senior researcher at Institute of Security Studies, Dakar, Senegal. Dr. Akinola, thank you so much for joining, and you are most welcome in program.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Akinola, how would you explain the non-traditional and non-violent approaches in addressing violent extremism and terrorism in Africa? How would you explain?
Okay, first, it's a pleasure to join this very important conversation. And just as the question you just asked, this is really about discussing the idea of non-violent approaches and to addressing violent extremism or terrorism. It's a very broad thing. So what I'll do is to really fine-tune our focus specifically on the question or the debate around dialogue and terrorism. So just to respond to what you've asked, I think this discussion is one that is quite not only important but also sensitive. It's one that is, in fact, it was sort of hinted at when the UN Secretary General just last year, he called for a global ceasefire of conflicts in light of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And when he made this statement last year, it was sort of a hint at the idea of exploring more of diplomacy and dialogue as opposed to having conflicts linger in countries. Now, there's something I'd like to do before we go very deep into this theme. I'd like to say that I'm a huge fan of chess, and for some of your viewers and perhaps you who plays chess, I'm not sure, but one thing is that chess is a game of strategy. Now, it's also a game of battles. It's a game that involves timing. It also involves consequences. Now, when you play chess, for instance, as a game, you must have a good strategy. And there are times when you have a particular duration to be able to make a move. And if you do not make that move within that time duration, then your strategy may begin to lose its potency. And it might reach a point where your opponent and yourself, you might actually reach a deadlock. And what I mean by a deadlock is where you are actually stuck with your moves. You're not able to make any further move or progress. Now, if I relate this analogy, which I'm trying to describe here, with what we have in real life, you look at Africa, you look at the world in general, you look at the different battles and conflicts taking place in countries, you look at the war on terror, the so-called war on terror. Now you find that a lot of times we see that these battles linger on. There almost seems to be a sense of a deadlock, as though states and terror groups are not able to make any progress in terms of having a victory for one side or the other. And this comes with consequences, because the challenge we're dealing with is that in the inability to have a definite solution or to have a victory for states over terror groups has created a situation where we have so many fatalities. You have communities and states that are having rising frequency of people who are being killed. Livelihoods are being destroyed. And then you look at the overall damage, even in a financial sense. I mean, the Global Terrorism Index that was published, the latest one that was published not too long ago, also provided figures regarding the cost, the economic cost of fighting this war on terror. Now, for the sake of viewers who may need to understand very well the context which I'm speaking of, we're not just looking at Africa. I mean, Africa has so many countries, so it's going to be a bit too general to just look at every country. But I would like to take us to look at specifically where we call the Lake Chad Basin. And I'm referring to countries like Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. And then to some extent, you can also look at countries in East Africa and the Horn. So we're looking at countries like Kenya, like Somalia, for instance. And I'm specifically mentioning these two regions on the continent because this is where you have some of the very major battles against terrorism taking place. Battles against Boko Haram, battles against Al-Shabaab, and so on. So you have this happening in these countries and these regions, and we see the high cost of waging this war on terror. And then you ask the question, which is what I'm asking, and we're asking ourselves in this conversation, why are we focusing so much on the use of force? Because the overall strategy which states have adopted in fighting this war on terror is the use of force. It's anchored on a military approach, which itself is not bad, because there is, the utility of the use of force. I mean, communities need to be defended. But then we need to ask ourselves at some point, if we aren't seeing the kind of results or the kind of peace which communities are yearning for, which states are yearning for, then is it not enough for us to begin to explore another strategy that can complement the existing one? And this is where the idea of dialogue comes in.
Why do we need non-violent or non-traditional approaches to addressing violent extremism or terrorism?
Thank you for that very important question. Why do we need to explore non-violent approaches? Now, first of all, it's important that we acknowledge that the war on terrorism, or the battles against violent extremism, are multidimensional. We're not just looking at battles involving military forces fighting terror groups, using guns and bombs to destroy and also to gain territory. It's not just a military battle. We're looking at a multidimensional situation, and by implication, it requires multiple levels of management. So what I mean by this is we must not only explore the military approach, we must also look at the criminal justice approach as well. Now it is, very clear. We've had studies on this that clearly reveal that sometimes when people join some of these groups to cause violence, they do so as a result of grievances. Some of them have had maybe members of their families or friends or those they know who have been killed. And as a result, there is this need for, sort of avenging, what has happened to them. And sometimes you find that human rights violations in some cases has driven people, has pushed people to join some of these groups such that they feel a sense to sort of redress the situation through violence. So there is the criminal justice approach, and this is where strengthening the rule of law as well as the criminal justice system in general is very important, ensuring that people and communities have their rights protected such that they are not made or put in a vulnerable situation. Now, if you go beyond that, we also have, there is a need to also look at the ideological aspect of this. This is another dimension. And the ideological aspect has to do with words. We are looking at the use of, the exploitation by some of these groups of ideas. And you cannot use bullets to destroy ideas. Ideas need to be met with a counter idea. So you need to have a counter narrative that is strong enough to challenge the existing ones which some of these groups are pushing. So this is where, for instance, we must explore, engaging community actors such as, for instance, Islamic clerics who have knowledge and are familiar with some of these ideas that some of these groups use. And we must also bear in mind that in trying to come up with a counter narrative, it must be one that is, really capable of addressing some of the misleading, ideas which people have followed in joining some of these groups. So I've mentioned the criminal justice approach. I've mentioned the ideological aspect of this, but it goes beyond that. There is the dimension that involves, the use of, the engaging the private sector. And for those who follow some of the UN, Security Council resolutions, there is one that is known as the UN Security Council Resolution 2396, and it really draws attention, an aspect of it draws attention to engaging the private sector in the fight against terrorism. So we're looking at, for instance, engaging the private sector in providing technological solutions that can help us to manage more effectively the borders between, communities or countries, that can prevent, people just crossing or traversing borders without, in illegal ways, the trafficking of arms, the trafficking of weapons, the trafficking of even drugs, the trafficking of human beings. We have all these criminal activities that can also be exploited, by some of these groups, and we've seen this happen. So, in a nutshell, there are different dimensions of this war on terror, and we must anchor our approach on a comprehensive platform that bears or takes into account all these different aspects.
Sir, why is it important to explore dialogue in particular? What do you say?
Yes, I think, when we speak about dialogue, like I mentioned earlier, we are, in a sense, it sort of brings up the idea of ideas, the ideas of having a conversation. And one may ask the question of, is it possible to even have a conversation, a real meaningful conversation with terror groups? Because sometimes, or most of the time, they come across as having very fixed ideas which cannot be shifted. And granted, that is usually the case. But then we also need to ask the more important question. The current approach that we are using, which is anchored on the use of force, on the military might, is it solving the problem? And the answer is no. I'll give you examples. When you look at countries like Somalia, for instance, at the height of military deployments of what we call the African Union mission in Somalia, we've had so many troops being deployed to Somalia to try and address the problem of terrorism caused by Al-Shabaab. Now, at the height of military deployment, we've had as many as 22,000 uniformed personnel in that country fighting that battle. And this has been the case for years. In fact, we've seen, in spite of the fact that there have been numerous airstrikes, we've had drone attacks, we've had offensive by the military in Somalia, we've had countries like Uganda, like Kenya, and other countries on the continent, contributing, efforts to addressing this problem. But then we see that the problem still exists. And it raises the question, it makes us to reflect on the fact that, is the current approach really sufficient? Is it one that is comprehensive enough? Is it one that can actually address the root causes of this problem? I mean, we're looking at socioeconomic challenges, for instance, governance challenges, governance gaps. We're looking at, we're talking about a group that does not only involve, guns and bombs. We're looking at a group that uses ideas. And when we talk about dialogue, it also raises the question of how best can we explore this option such that we can maybe perhaps engage some of these groups through third parties, for instance. Maybe we can explore the use of community actors within the countries that are affected. And gradually, phase by phase, we might reach a point where we have some kind of conversation that can take place. And at the moment, it might look impossible. But then I think history tells us that in instances where we've had dialogue explored in addressing violent extremism, in the case of Colombia, for instance, in Sri Lanka, for instance, we've seen that it happened over a period of years. It didn't happen in one phase. It happened in stages. And I think that is the approach we need to look at, looking at it in phases and, engagements that involve community actors such that we can use their ideas to sort of get our foot, at least in the room, and then gradually see where this takes us while complementing the military approach.
If states or governments are to explore the difficult option of dialogue, so where can they start from?
That's such a very important question. I think the most important place will be to start with communities. Why communities? Communities are the most impacted by the violence caused by terror groups. They understand the impact of this violence. They are perhaps most familiar with some of these groups. In fact, in a lot of cases, we see that these violent extremist groups or terror groups use communities. They exploit them. They gain members. They sort of exploit them also for recruitment. They are able to even spy on these communities. And in some cases, we see where communities have actually helped the security forces or agencies in the fight against terrorism. So I think a very important, a point of entry which we must explore at an initial level is to engage community actors, to have a conversation with them. And when I say community actors, I'm not just talking in a vague sense. We're looking at a range of different individuals and groups within communities. We're looking at, for instance, those who are, religious, who represent religious institutions, the clerics, both the Islamic and the Christian clerics. who are familiar with ideas that some of these groups use. We're looking at engaging women groups. There must be a gender dimension to this because we've seen instances where some of these groups use women and girls to commit suicide attacks and to cause violence, to carry weapons, to spy. So women groups also have knowledge which they can contribute, and this is very important. We are looking at engaging traditional institutions. In the case of Somalia, for instance, you have the clan system. You have clan elders. In the case of the Lake Chad Basin countries like Nigeria, for instance, you have the emirate system, you have emirs, you have district heads, you have village heads, you have ward heads. You have institutions that have historically been embedded in the system, in communities, and they are very familiar with what is happening there. And most importantly, we're looking at the youth. Africa has a very high youth population, a rising population of youth. And some of these groups, or violent extremist groups, they exploit the youths. So it is important that youth actors or youth groups are also engaged to hear their ideas, to listen to them, and to see how their ideas can contribute to solutions, to make them feel as being part of the decision-making process and not just leaving it for the government, but having them being involved in exploring ideas, in implementing them, and also evaluating how this implementation has produced results and where things can be improved.
Dr. Akinola, when will be the best time period to initiate the dialogue if states decide to explore this option?
Now, it's a very tricky question. What I will say is this. Personally, from what I have observed, and especially in the studies we have done, what we see is that most of the time people say that when terror groups are on the defensive, when they are on the back foot, when they have been pounded by airstrikes, and when they've lost members of the morale, that is the best time to sort of engage them in sort of a kind of dialogue or negotiation to end the conflict. But what we see in reality is a case where when terror groups are on the back foot, when they're on the defensive, in reality, most of the governments or states do not necessarily engage in talks. In fact, that is the point when governments are actually, they feel the need to sort of achieve a military triumph, and therefore they feel that what is necessary now is a final blow that will, eradicate some of these groups. And they never see the need for negotiating because they feel they have the upper hand. So we've seen cases like in Nigeria, for instance, around 2015, where Boko Haram, the terror group there, seemed to have been was placed on the defensive, and it seemed like Boko Haram had lost territory. Boko Haram seemed to be sort of almost being defeated. And then the government, sort of came out with this sort of pronouncement or announcement that Boko Haram was technically defeated. And this was 5 years ago. It's almost 6 years now. And today we're seeing a case where Boko Haram is still very active. In fact, there are at least 2 factions of the group that are active. So when we speak of timing, I think what we really need to look at is a case where, for the side of states or governments, there must be the political will that irrespective of whether or not these groups are on the defensive, I think there is the need that government actors must themselves have a strategy. They must develop and establish a kind of strategy amongst themselves on their side, such that irrespective of the timing, they will be able to sort of not only engage community actors, but also see where they can implement aspects of their strategy. So it wouldn't just be a case of just waiting for when terror groups are on the defensive, but actually having a plan on their own side that they can tap into, a plan that involves perhaps third parties that are credible, a plan that involves community engagement, a plan that involves sort of addressing socioeconomic deprivation and plugging governance gaps. A plan that is sort of solid and comprehensive and not just waiting for a reaction or an action from terror groups before they respond.
What role external actors can play in supporting this process that involves the use of dialogue?
Yes, I think in responding to this question, I think external actors have an important role to play, not only in terms of sharing ideas, because we have different countries, even outside Africa, that have been affected by violent extremism. I mean, look at the United States. America was hit, in 2001, on 9/11 by Al-Qaeda. We've seen even other attacks on American soil. We've seen the United Kingdom, attacked by ISIS, by those who are sympathizers of ISIS and other groups. And we've seen other countries in Asia as well. In India, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, we've seen all this happen. So I think external actors can share lessons. The context might not be the same, of course, but then I think there is the lessons sharing component of this, which can help. In fact, we had at some point the global coalition, against Daesh or against ISIS, which sort of brought together, different countries, in a sort of a coalition against, ISIS. There is also the role of training and capacity enhancement of the security sector. A vibrant security sector and one that is accountable is very important in countries that are faced with, the threat of violent extremism. And I think external actors in some way, at some level, can contribute to capacity enhancement and trainings. Conversations, of course, can also take place at different levels of convenings. For instance, at different forums. For instance, I've been to conferences and forums where we see different countries coming together to discuss and deliberate on these issues. And I think this affords the opportunity for countries that are affected to sort of understand what is going on outside their local environment and to see where initiatives can be inspired. We have external actors involved in organizational programming. For instance, at the level of the African Union, there can be engagement between the African Union and the European Union, for instance. We have, the global community in general, even at the level of the United Nations, sort of contributing to mediation expertise in affected countries. And I think this is where the convening power of the international community and certain actors can be very useful. It can actually inspire an environment, a global environment where this kind of conversations that we're actually having now can even be expanded and more ideas can be inspired and even be implemented.
So how do you see China's role in Africa in capacity building and development sector and peace building? How do you see China in Africa?
That's a very interesting question. China's role in Africa, I mean, it's been talked about, a lot. It's one that is gaining so much attention because of, China's investment and, presence in different African countries. But I think I would like to rephrase the question in a different way. I would like to say, how do we see Africa's role, in taking the initiative in spite of a rising China? So rather than looking at China being involved in Africa and also contributing in some way, I think it's even perhaps more important for us to look at how Africa itself, African countries, African peoples can actually contribute and enhance their own capacity, use and exercise their political will, and contribute something to the global conversation on different issues, on security, on the economy, on the environment, on culture, on diplomacy. African countries have a lot of ideas, and there's a lot of contribution potentially that can be made. And I think in spite of a rising China and what looks like China sort of occupying a wide space on the continent, having a footprint on the continent, it's about Africa actually rising and also trying to take the initiative in spite of this. And this is where African leaders and the people must exercise the political will, and there must be a collective conversation. There must be sort of a need to revisit the social contract involving leaders on the continent and those who are governed, such that there can be a kind of understanding of a common approach, moving forward in spite of the challenges that are facing countries.
How would you explain Pakistan's role in Africa, especially peacekeeping struggle and support for African states?
Yeah, that's a very important question. I think Pakistan has a lot to contribute. Just like any other country. I mean, Pakistan has experiences it has had to go through, not only in dealing with violent extremism, but also in terms of trade, in terms of culture, in terms of other sectors. We live in a very interconnected world. It's we call it a globalized world. And the problems which we are dealing with in the present day period, even the problem of terrorism, it's a transnational problem. It's one that transcends borders. So it's not only about one country or a group of countries, it's one that is global. So I think Pakistan coming into this whole, this global context, being part of this global context, can also share lessons. I have been, like I mentioned earlier, I remember in 2018, I was at a conference, I believe it was in Qatar, I can't recall the country, but at a conference where we had delegates from Pakistan who came to make presentations and to share lessons at the forum. We had experts and analysts, policymakers who were coming to sort of present ideas on how they have been able to engage local communities. And I think this really brought value to the table. So I see a situation where in an increasingly interconnected world, we see the need for more and more engagement by countries, not only Pakistan, but also countries in Asia and globally, contributing to the debates on countering violent extremism, contributing to the debates on global cooperation, contributing to the debates on how to address the challenges of climate change or brought about by climate change and the environment. So I think Pakistan definitely has a role to play. The experiences of Pakistan can definitely add value, and then we can all share lessons and see what can be relevant for our context.
Dr. Akinola, thank you so much for your valuable and precious analysis, and thank you so much for joining again. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure being here, and all the very best. Thank you.